Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's video on the subject of external validation. And there's nothing quite like having a camera in your face to heighten those feelings of being self-conscious and how you're appearing to others. So it's kind of ironic given the subject material for this week. But anyway, let's move on. External validation. We all like to feel accepted. We all like to feel valued. We all like to feel that we're recognized by our peers. But just how much emphasis should we place on what others think of us? You know, is it something? Is it a lot? Is it nothing? Is it dependent on who the person is? So let's sort of drill down into some of that. It's certainly always been the case that, you know, people have been we've been insecure about our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our choices, our achievements. Thanks to advances in technology, social media has certainly exacerbated those feelings of insecurity around those a thousandfold. But as we display and put forward ourselves into the world, it's very easy to feel like you're coming under attack from all angles, from sometimes people you don't even know. Once again, thanks to social media for that one. But it's hard because you can't just take all the good and ignore all the bad. You know, that's a bit sort of naive and infantile, to say the least. You know, I mean, it'd be nice if we could just say every time, you know, someone said we did something good, be like, oh, yay. And then anytime someone said we did something bad, I'd be like, no, I don't need to listen to you. But that's, you know, not a good recipe for success. Let me just refer back to my article that I wrote on it. Just 2 seconds. So the thing is, what we can do, that's can be problematic, is if we start trying to seek too much external validation. And what happens then is that you start to place what the psychological term is locus of control. And basically you begin to externalize that. So rather than having control over your actions and your behavior, that starts to be placed in other people because you want to receive that positive feedback from others. So you keep doing the behavior that gives you that response from people rather than doing what, you know, you're internally motivated to do and whether or not you think it's good for you. So then there can be this sort of disjoint happening where you start to act, basically not true to yourself, but you're doing it so that you can receive that positivity from others. And essentially that's usually where resentment starts to build up, because you end up doing things that are counter to you in order to get a reward. And what else? Yeah, sort of thing, like the control of your thoughts and behaviors become located in other people. And then, so then basically your emotions then at the whim of other people, which is not what you want to do. So that basically what happens then is that you start to, you can feel pretty lousy because you can do things that you would expect to normally get, you know, a good response from others from. And then when you don't get that response, not only have you done something, that you don't necessarily want to do, but then you haven't gotten even the reward for it. So it's like a double whammy. But you want to try and sort of, as I said in another post, you want to try and internalize that. Otherwise your self-worth starts to become too externalized, and that's not a good thing. And you start to feel at odds with yourself, and you don't act sort of authentically, and that's not a good thing. So what you see some people do is they start to balance it, or sort of say counterbalance it too far the other way, and you start getting the whole like, oh well, you don't care at all what people think of you, and you see a lot of this in the sort of self-development and motivation industry, if you will. But then again, that's not, that tends you towards sort of narcissism and apathy. And that's not a good thing either. And I mean, who would really want a world where no one really cared what you did and thought? So obviously there's a sweet spot where it's not quite... was it like the Three Little Bears? It's like, it's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. Because there's problems either way. If you care what other people think, you probably end up with problems, and if you don't care what other people think, you're going to probably end up with problems as well. So there's sort of half-truths at best. So one thing I always say that we should do is, like things like self-awareness, self-knowledge are key. I mean, the more you can know about yourself and be aware of yourself, and, where you're going, what your goals are, your strengths and weaknesses, how you react to certain situations, etc. It can only be a good thing. The more you know about yourself, the more you become aware of yourself and who you are. And that was another good point. The difference between sort of not caring what others think and developing sort of a self-awareness and self-knowledge is that when you just don't care what other people think, you're just reducing or eliminating any sort of, negativity that comes from without. But that can sort of heighten possible chances for sort of delusions of grandeur where you don't think you're wrong. I mean, sometimes you do need to be told you're wrong, and we see this problem probably with a lot of celebrities and pro athletes who seem to just surround themselves with yes men. But that's so you don't want to just shut down the external validation, but it's about sort of more who you tune into more than anything. And sort of like when you develop your self-knowledge and self-awareness, you're like I said before, you're internalizing that self-worth. You've brought back in your locus of control, and you're building your integrity and moral character. So, it gives you that sort of strength and courage to contend with the world, if you will. Excuse me. There's a good quote here by Rudyard Kipling that I'll read out. I'll read out in its entirety here. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. To be your own man is hard business. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. And I feel that's a really good one for being a strong individual and not getting caught up too much in the current of conformity, especially against your better judgment. Let's put it that way. However, I will say this, that we are social creatures, and socialization does play a huge part in building who we are and also keeping us alive. So you have the sort of the macro and the micro, the individual and the society. And really, society wouldn't function if we all didn't sort of care about each other and care about what others thought of us. The sort of socializing is that, it helps to sort of moderate our behavior. We get to sort of learn new information, new views. It also helps to sort of control and shape our attitudes and actions. Basically, from an evolutionary standpoint, our species has survived in part due to our ability to form groups and communities. And if one was, expelled from the tribe per se, it basically meant death for a lot of our primitive humans, at least. So you had to do what would get you respected by the group or by the tribe, and you had to sort of fulfill your role. And so in essence, you had to care what people thought. So these things are sort of like deeply ingrained in us, even though we're no longer, swinging from the trees. So that sort of stuff is sort of really deeply nestled into our biological and neurological systems. And you still see those kinds of responses out there in the world. I mean, you only have to look probably over the last 6 years, I mean, the in-group, out-group biases that you see manifesting themselves around the world are as prevalent as ever. And so as much as we like to think of ourselves as sort of these sort of strong, independent creatures, that is only able when we're nestled in within a much larger interdependent, I should say, reality and greater world. Now, moving on, I'd like to talk a little bit just quickly about my own struggles with external validation. It's not necessarily been easy for me in that regard because, well, for one, I generally don't like people having a negative view of me. So that leads me to caring too much about people's opinion of me and then trying to then rectify why they have a negative view of me. Partially also, I've never really felt like I've been in a group of people that has ever truly accepted me for who I am, like, flaws and all. And for that sort of reason, I've always seemed to be locked out of the so-called purple circle. So, it's always like people have wanted me around for either some talent or skill or knowledge that I have, rather than necessarily me, like Martin, So, I mean, that's a little bit disappointing, but yeah, I suppose it's partly the downside to always feeling like I have to know. In essence, it's sort of, yeah, we'll move on from that. Anyway, also due to the fact that I'm quite a empathetic and understanding person, I also have quite a developed sensitivity to my impact on others. So the problem for me is always going to be caring too much about what other people think of me. So it's never going to be about not, caring enough. I'm always going to be more concerned with, am I having a positive impact on the people around me, which is generally a good thing, but sometimes it can go a little bit too far. I guess we'll sort of try and wrap this up now. As I've mentioned before, it feels like, you care about what others think of you and it's somehow wrong. You don't care what people think of you and it's somehow wrong. So like, what do you do and who do you trust and all that sort of stuff. Generally, I go with very few people in this regard. I mean, for starters, you have to value what you think of yourself. It's funny how people, when usually sort of, they get thrust upon them with this question about like, caring about what others think. And, I mean, obviously it's in the definition of the question. Others is generally you start looking elsewhere, like, friends, family, your intimate partner, etc. But you have to make sure that you think highly of you. Otherwise, that is going to be a very long and painful life. But generally speaking, I'd say I'm really hopeful that you have at least one family member who you can turn to and who you can sort of value what they think of you and can give you some good advice. I'd like to think hopefully that you have a close friend or an intimate partner and generally a mentor, guide, or sort of respected figure out there in the world somewhere. So really, when it comes to external validation, it's someone whose opinion you value and who you can trust. And I wouldn't have an expansive group of people either. I mean, that's a personal choice, but to me, it can start interfering too much with you and your direction when you start getting too many voices involved. It's kind of almost a little bit like too many chiefs and not enough Indians. It generally can either slow down or derail what you're doing. And yeah, that's sort of really about it. Obviously, I'm trying to get a bit better at these. I'm trying to get a bit more confident in front of the camera, and sort of not go off on too many tangents or crack too many jokes but hopefully this wasn't too bad a look at the subject of external validation. I'll leave you on this one thought though. It's really important to learn how to be by yourself so that you can be with others out of want rather than need. You need to understand who you want in your life and who you do not want in your life. I think we should utilize the fact that most people don't care about you in the grand scheme of things, as hard as that may sound. Nor will the majority of people stay with you throughout your life. And I wrote about that in another article, which I'll link in the description for you. And once you sort of understand those two things, it can feel quite liberating, to say the least, and you can sort of get on with life with a bit more courage and peace, I guess. Anyway, until next week, take care.